Hi everyone and welcome to day 2 of the symposium. It's time to start, and since we are filming and recording the seminar, I would like everyone who speaks or asks for the word to speak in a microphone, and also please say your name, so it will make sense for the ones who listen afterwards. And our first speaker of today is Niclas Östlind, PhD in photography, Akademin Valand, and he will speak on the speaking title, Neighbours Makes All Differences in the World. Varsågod, Niclas.
Thank you very much. I will talk about collaborations between the Nordic countries in a historical, with a historical point of view. I will also focus on questions concerning aesthetics and exhibition making and publishing, as well as institutional frameworks. I start in the glorious 90s, which were a heyday for collaborations. This is a cartoon by Olof Westphalen, and he was a regular contributor to the magazine Nu. So in every issue there were a cartoon referring to the art scene. Olof Westphalen is now professor at the Royal Institute of Art on Skeppsholmen in Stockholm. And so you might not see it sitting there, I will read the text. Hi, my name is Sven, and I'm here on a 1-year GTAAMRTRG grant. GTAAMRTRG, go to America and make them real jealous. This was actually the situation in the 90s. Scandinavian artists, a lot of them working in photography, were sent abroad on grants that if you were a struggling American artist, that was making you jealous. The prosperous 90s was actually due to both magazines like Nu and a support system and an idea about creating networks through programs of residencies. So in Stockholm or in Sweden, we established Jaspis. And the importance for Jaspis, Anoka, and Frame, and those organizations for bringing the Scandinavian art into a more international context, as well as bringing the international art scene to our Nordic region, can't be overstated. It was a shift that is historically one of the most important things that ever happened. Under Nu, it says the Nordic Art Review, formerly Sixi and Index. Those two merged in '99, and I was one of the editors of Index. But when it was turned into Nu, I left the editorial board. But all these people that were in the board are now in very prestigious positions. And there were board members from all over the Scandinavian countries. This is the one of the magazines that merged and created in Nu, the Nordic Art Review. These magazines were platforms where writers were asked to reflect on Scandinavian artists, writers from abroad, but also from the scene in the Scandinavian countries. But the big thing was, it was not about, first and foremost, promoting Scandinavian art. It was to make Scandinavian art part of a larger context. It was founded by the Nordic, money, Nordic Council, etc. But the idea was internationality. It's not that we are going to pack and wrap, this is Scandinavian art, and we want that to be seen abroad. No, we should be part on equal terms in a professional field. This is one of the issues that actually actually have a more orientation towards what's happening in Scandinavia. So it says, the 90s, what was it all about? And then you have writers reflecting on what was happening in the 90s. And in this, later stages, also other countries were included on the other side of the Baltic Sea. So the Lithuanian and that area. This actually already started in the late 80s and early 90s, because Nu is from the late 90s. If you go back and read Bildtidningen or Index, you can see that people are reflecting on what is happening in the new European situation after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So 89 is a kind of around there. One starts to talk about the strength and possibilities of seeing ourselves as a region. So not separating the countries, but creating something that is larger than the individual states, and that we will be able to survive almost and also be a more active part if we were looking at ourselves as a region. And there was a lot of money into this. And Nu is probably the most well-founded publication that has ever been published. It was because there were two budgets, both from Index and from 60, and it was also extra money from the government. So, and it was a kind of project running for 3 years. In one of the last issues, though, the sad thing is in the editorial it says like this, and I quote, "During the last year, however, we have been surprised by how difficult it is to collaborate across national borders, especially in the Nordic region. Instead of focusing in content and vision, some kind of national or regional competition seemed to arise." So this is a bit of a testament from the editorial board of Nu. This is also one of the last kind of outcomes of this kind of wave of success. It's a publication edited by Daniel Birnbaum and Jan Peter Nilsson, Like Virginity Once Lost, 5 views on Nordic art now. And this was there was called the Nordic Miracle, and Hans Ulrich Obrist was focusing on the Nordic countries. And here it also comes down to, personal networks. It's easy to see these people were friends with each other. They chat and traveled, did exhibitions, met at biennales. Daniel Birnbaum and Hans Ulrich was close friends. So these people, I must say, also these people were part of creating this fuss and prosperous and this also interested view from abroad on what we were doing here, as well as that these artists by themselves became part of an art scene that rarely Scandinavian artists have been included in. But it started much earlier. So Nordisk Tidskrift för Fotografi, or Nordic Journal for Photography, was released first in 1917. And in the first issue, they really have a kind of Nordic editorial board. They show photographers from almost all of Scandinavia, and that continues. But rather quickly, it becomes more a national forum, I would like to say. It's also in this magazine that the early writing of the history of photography in the Nordic countries was published by Helmer Bäckström, who had an annual kind of article called Nordic Photography, an overview of the Nordic countries' photo art, because there was this interest in photo as an art. In the 1910s, the pictures were, you can't talk about a Nordic aesthetic that is coming later, because it all looks like pictorialism, you know, the international trend. You can't tell one from the other. They all look the same in a way. So that was the fashion. So which is not, and I picked this issue from 1945. This is actually the first issue after the war. And this is more what was seen as a kind of Scandinavian imagery and a photo and the ideal of a Scandinavian photography. At that time, this publication is almost all about these small amateur associations. It was a forum for them more than an important publication for Nordic photography. Now comes some rather dry publications with no images. But it's also interesting to see reading this. It's incredible because these are reports from symposiums like this. And someone was transcribing all the discussions. And you can, they're written on, typewriters and stencilized. This is the first Nordic Photo Museum and Photo Historical Symposium held in Borgå in Finland in August 1973. And on the topic or on the agenda were, of course, the institutional landscape. What would we like to have? What kind of photography institution do we need? There was a lot about preservation because these institutions that were inaugurated in the early 70s, one of the first tasks was to deal with a lot of collections and to manage those. There were crises about how these photographs will survive to the coming generations. Another issue was the question of history writing. Who is doing the history writing? And actually there is a rather agitating and argumentative contribution by Per Hemmingsson saying that, oh, no, there are no real photo historians. They only copy Helmer Bäckström's text and no one has an original thought and they don't know how to make footnotes. Yeah. For those who wonder, he's still very active, but from a kind of side perspective, he calls everyone that is involved in this field. Later on in 90s, Solfrid Söderlund, who makes one of the first theses on early photography in Sweden or 19th century photography, she does this survey of the history of writing in the Scandinavian or Nordic countries. So she's a bibliography. She goes through every article that was published. And she also makes this kind of general reflection, is that the photo history research in the Scandinavian countries are actually depending on personal or individuals' personal preferences. It's so, the field is so thin that individual researchers' reflections, ideals, and agendas affect very heavily the outcome. And luckily, since then, the 90s, this has changed. The body of research is much bigger today. But this was a very important, and it covered all the Nordic countries. This is also an example of a conference in 91, Nordisk konferens om fotografi. The topic is photo as medium, medel, and medel och mål. Hopefully you understand. And it's nice to see the graphics. It's not very sophisticated, and above there you see it is a computer and a disk and something else. It's a lot about archiving, preservation, and also institutions. what kind of photo museums do we need and want? Anyone was on this conference? You were. In the material, I also came across this one, which I think is a really important one. Kvinnliga fotografer i Norden stiller ut i Oslo 1988. And there is a short introduction, and I will quote that as well. Let's see if I find it there. Our exhibition is not censored, and it does not have a subject. We have, in connection with the Scandinavian Women Conference in Oslo, 30th of July to 7th of August 1988, grabbed the opportunity to meet. The first meeting of this kind in the Nordic countries. The first meeting of this kind in the Nordic countries, 1988. One of the participants was Annika Karlsson Riksson, and this is what she presented at the exhibition. If I had shown this to you, not telling it's Annika Karlsson Riksson, no one would have been able to guess, because it's so different from what she, a couple of years later, became famous for. Now comes a series of exhibitions focusing on photography and Scandinavia. And this is, I think, the historically most important exhibition covering this region that has ever been made. And it's important because also a lot of other exhibitions and thinking about Scandinavian photography refers to this, the frozen image that was shown at Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. It was a part of a larger scheme that was, see what it was called. It was Scandinavia Today, and that was touring. That was a kind of focus on Scandinavia, and it was in 1982, 1983. And those who financed this exhibition and were the initiative came from the American Scandinavian Foundation. Bear that in mind. It was we that wanted someone to see us, and it was kind of packed and formulated. The good thing was actually that they then asked someone from outside to do it. So it was Martin Friedman who was the curator, and he came here, did research, and then put together a quite ambitious exhibition, I must say, and the catalog, which is, you can still find in second-hand bookstores. He asks himself, what is Scandinavian with Scandinavian photography? And as everyone else says, it's impossible to answer. But there is a certain kind of stillness in all the works that I have seen. So that is his, idea about the mode of Scandinavian photography. It has a certain kind of stillness. I mean, it's a very general observation, but still. And he also said, a little bit kind of contrasting that, and I quote, "It is the tension between form and feeling that gives vibrance to the artistic phenomenon of photography in Scandinavia." So he also identified tensions between form and feeling. In 1994, ICP, who also was part of the Frozen Image production, ICP, on the initiative of the American Scandinavian Foundation, asked the curator Stephen Henry Madoff to produce an exhibition on contemporary Scandinavian photography. And it's called Stranger Than Paradise. And on the cover we see Annika Karlsson Riksson as we know her. These are the works in the early 90s that kind of was part of the establishing of the field of postmodern camera-based or photo-based art. Of course, Stephen Henry Madoff must say that Martin Fried was wrong. That is his kind of almost start his introductory essay saying that Martin Friedman was wrong. It's not about stillness. He sees irony, he sees double gaze that looks into the medium of photography, in the politics of representation, more than they looking at the motif. So, I mean, he has a postmodern gaze. He's part of the, you know, that apparatus. So, of course, he chooses something totally different. He as well says it's actually impossible to define what is truly Scandinavian, but at the same time, he does. He also reflects on the presence of nature, and he says it's almost like a fetish in the Nordic photography. They can't get rid of the nature. Everyone is occupied with it. But the examples he's chosen has this double gaze or irony. So they don't, it's not about stillness and contemplation. It's a reflection about our gaze on nature. See, it has this kind of meta perspective that we, you know, that the postmodern theory and practice brought in. Stephen Henry Madoff is now at the School of Visual Arts, and he writes a lot about art education. In 2001, as you see, the American Scandinavian Foundation organized another exhibition on contemporary Scandinavian photography. Faces and Figures is the title. And now it's organized in collaboration with Preuss Fotomuseum in Horten, outside Oslo. And this is a little bit more traditional in its outlook. It goes, as you see on the cover, we have Christer Strömholm. So it's kind of writes or mapping the field of Scandinavian photography from that point of view of the more subjective personal gaze on and, you know, traditional kind of black and white photography. It's interesting that this one comes after Stephen Henry Madoff's, because his is kind of more into what is seen at the time as contemporary photography than this one was in 2001. It's also interesting that all of these three exhibitions were organized by the American Scandinavian Foundation. So the importance of their role and their objective to kind of make an interest for Scandinavia on many levels is, of course, is important for the, you know, considering the framework or how Scandinavian photography has been seen. Stephen Henry Madoff said that, okay, the thing with the landscape, and of course in the frozen image there was a lot about landscape. This is a publication that was released in 1989, and the editor is Jan Erik Lundström, one of the key persons in the, I would like to say, in the Scandinavian scene in the late 80s and the 90s. So he did his anthology on Nordic landscape. And from the introductory text, which is, I must say, really good, he writes, in addition, landscape nature is a charged subject for us Northerners who still carry our hunter and gatherer genes. Our agriculture epoch turned out to be only a brief historical parenthesis as we took the step from nomadic existence to the electronic age only in a few centuries, and therefore back to nature has never been especially far for us. Back to nature will later on be a famous title on a famous work by Annika von Hauswolf. There is one formulation there, carry our hunter and gatherer genes. I don't think that would be written today. And this is not so, with all due respect, but I couldn't resist showing this work, this image in another folder documenting a conference on very Nordic photography. This one. This is Jan-Erik Lundström and the people participating in the conference. They are definitely close to hunter and gathering. So. This is the cover of Nordiska stämningar, vår tids landskapsfotografi, an exhibition shown at Arken 2008. And it's interesting. You take this topic and you say, we do an exhibition on Nordic landscape photography. And the first thing you read in the introduction is that is there anything like a Nordic landscape? So it's kind of contradicting the idea. And it's a little bit rhetorical, because they all kind of fostering this idea about a certain kind of landscape and approach to the landscape. And at the same time, they say this do not exist. So this is one rather recent. We have this one as well, Northern Lights, which is also one of those kind of key phrases that you bump into if you look into Nordic photography. This is a little bit more advanced when it comes to the constellation of photographers. They come from a little bit of different backgrounds and more into the field of photography as contemporary art. This, which we happily can see on the wall, is the cover of the last issue or the last catalog of the Victor Fellowship 10 years. This is the 10 years anniversary, and it's also the last one when the Hasselblad Foundation do a new Nordic photography exhibition. The prize will remain, but they won't do an exhibition. And it's also the front cover representing 10 years of new Nordic photography. It's also a picture with a landscape. This is something that we could have an own talk about, but I won't go into it in depth. This is the Helsinki School and 3 of their many publications. And I would say something. And also, you see the cover. It's repeating itself. It's the same kind of image. This is a very successful phenomenon, as everyone knows. And the publications are spread, and there are a few other photographers of younger generations that get this much attention as those who are included in the Helsinki School. The Hachikan makes the books, and they are also seen in art fairs. I do happen to have a little bit of an unusual kind of background, because I also worked in the commercial field for fine art dealers and for gallerists. And I can also see that, yep, they are there more than most of the Swedish, for example, artists or Norwegian artists of the same generation. But if I was a photographer, I wouldn't think that was a good thing. And from my culture, sociological, and market-oriented gaze, I would say it's a success that reached a certain level, because they're not respected as something more original or interesting in a deeper sense. That's how colleagues talk on a fair, as I call my colleagues from the field of the market. It's nice things to hang over the sofa. It could be Luma's pictures, but it's not considered art as other galleries representing. There are a few of these individual artists that have a career outside being part of the Helsinki School. But the ones in the Helsinki School, they have a success, but it's limited. And it will be very difficult for them to, go further than that, because the frame is so kind of tight. So now we have that image again, and that was used also for the cover of the Arken exhibition about landscape. Here we have an artist, Elina Broterius, who is a part of Helsinki School, but has a career of her own. This is the cover. I mean, this is prestigious. She is the cover of the photograph as contemporary art, which is, I think, the most published photo book ever, except for Family of Man. I learned to know Charlotte Cotton in the early 2000s when I did a show on Helen Chadwick, and she was writing this book, and we discussed a lot about the contemporary scene. And she said, if I see one more picture of a woman turning her head away, looking into a distant, beautiful landscape, I will suffocate. And that was not what's shown on the cover. It's totally sad. Someone gazing at us, looking into, the viewer. This, I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful. I mean, there are a lot of these works are great by themselves, but see how they are used, and the repetitive, that they always are the one who represent Scandinavian photography is a bit limiting. There were, in the 90s, and early, I must say more in the 90s actually, in this group of people that created the magazine Nu, which were kind of, it was a Scandinavian editorial board. There were people doing things that were different. This is actually also a show that has an undertitle, Contemporary Scandinavian Photography. It was curated by Maria Lind and Jan-Erik Lundström, but the theme was not, this is Scandinavian photography. It was, as the title is, exposed. So it was a very highly political, charged themes that these photographers were portraying. And they were framed in this, that this is photography that deals with society, with representation, with things that has an urgency and are important. This is actually one of the few shows that Maria Lind did that was media specific in a way. It was about contemporary Scandinavian photography, and it was produced by Hasselblad, who is a photo institution. Otherwise, that was not so popular, thinking in lines of media specificity. This is a book for just a couple of years ago, Ahmet Unver, Far Away. One of the exhibitions that was also framing Scandinavian photography was called Longing for Longing, and it was shown in Berlin, in the Scandinavian, the embassies that are gathered together. So, and it was Finn Trane he was the curator, and it was shown in that very Nordic kind of context. And the idea of Scandinavian photography as the longing is a big thing for it. This is a longing of a different kind. And what I think is so important with this book, it brings in another perspective, other people than we normally see in most of the images representing Scandinavian photography. It's a very personal, autobiographical work. It looks a little bit like Lars Thunbjörk and the other kind of in the aesthetic, but it looks into someone else's lives that are not often represented. What is also so amazing with this book is the text. It's a short novel, I would like to say, about how in the dark winter the family travels to Arlanda, sitting in the waiting hall or the cafe, looking to where the planes are landing and taking off, looking and then spotting the ones that go to Turkey. So the longing, the parents' longing is so strong, so they leave their home to sit, to look the planes leaving for Turkey, which is their, in a way, home country. And then the text problematizes what is now our home, because now we live here, our children are born here, and we can't get back to Turkey. This is in the time of the, the military dictatorship and problems that made it difficult for them to go back. And the reflection is that even though these kids, like Ahmed, who is born in Sweden, also inherited their parents' longing for a home that they have a very complicated relation to. This is also a work that we soon will hear more about, migrant documents that also show another aspect of Scandinavian life in relation to a larger context that I think is also lacking in the presentation of what Scandinavian photography is about in the last years. I will end with a little bit of thoughts on institutions and curating. This is, as you know, Fotografiska, just a couple of 100 meters from here. When it started, no one gave it. Everyone said, "I gave it 3 months." And since we all are part of a more kind of highbrow culture, we were a little bit looking, laughing behind the backs, and no one could ever think, except for themselves, that this will be one of the most successful culture enterprises we have had from the point of view of visiting figures. They have about 1,000 visitors per day. And they also show, the contribution to the amount of photo exhibitions that they have generated is incredible. But curatorial, they don't have any curators because they don't need curators. It's not part of their concept. Curators make it more complicated, and we need to make fast changes of the exhibition. Should be done in 24 hours. So curators, they're just an obstacle. So here we have an institution giving the audience photography more than they can ask for in a way. And that has been a real, the interest of photography for a general public has never been larger. And I must say that is probably due to Fotografiska. But from the reflective part and from the curatorial part, this is something else. It's not, if you're interested in curating, reflection, making things a little bit more complicated and, with a political agenda as well, this is not the answer. Interestingly enough, I saw that Ahmed will be part of their Easter Salon, so things are also changing. This is another situation today when it comes to the reflection. We did have a photo library, and as you see on the sign, is not there anymore. And I think with the success of Fotografiska, what we need and where we should look onto collaborations in the field of the Nordic scene is, in a way, research. If we should gather our strength and resources, research is one field that we should, really look into. More than trying to promote a certain kind of Scandinavian aesthetic or try to, analyze what that actually is. Because I think that as history's prose, it will be something that will slide away and also be mostly repetitive and, taking forms that probably is not so innovative. So resources to research is necessary. I also think that the example of Nu and the 90s is to having a platform that has an international agenda. It's not first and foremost about Scandinavian photography. It's about creating a platform where we can meet other actors, where Scandinavian photographers and artists can meet and be part of a larger context. So making that happen is more important than making one more Scandinavian photography show. With all due respect, I mean, it's also good, but I think if we really should do something that will benefit and make a change, it's going back to the idea of being part of an international scene. This is one of the latest examples of this Nordic Now, which I also think it's a really good thing, even though if I think that the content could be a little bit different. But the publication is one of the vehicles for having a reflection, not only about Nordic photography, but that we should create a reflection on photography as art or other aspects of photography that makes a difference in a larger context. Those resources we can gain together, but the focus should be that we should do something that is important and asked for by other people than from this region. Tomorrow, there is a book launch at Whitechapel Gallery with a book about Scandinavian photography. And the good thing with that book is that it actually takes a little bit of a different gaze or look or twist and turn on the scene of photography in Scandinavia today. And I think that is a good thing at Whitechapel in London, Scandinavian photography. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Niclas, for a very interesting talk. Many thoughts triggered off in my head. But we will start with the audience. Any questions for Niclas? And say your name.
Hi, I'm Christine Kern from Photographic Center in Denmark, Copenhagen, and I would also like to say thank you for this fantastic historical perspective. And I think when you ended with research should be the future, I would just make an institutional point because, from my opinion, I totally agree, but it's really difficult because a lot of the institutions, at least in Denmark, that works with photography, they do not have the capacity for research. For instance, Photographic Center is a Kunsthalle. We don't have money or obligations to do research or collect or anything like the museums. Then there's Gallery Image, which is also even smaller than us. Then there is, of course, Brands we heard about yesterday. They have one curator, Jens, 2 days a week. That's it. I don't think his time leaves much space for research. And then, of course, there's the National Photo Museum, which is actually a library. But I think their way of researching is very different from what you might expect for an art institution. So at least in Denmark, it's really hard to see where is the space for this kind of research. I know here in Norway there has been, last year, published a PhD on Swedish photography. And yeah, I would just like to hear your comment on that.
My answer is in the title, Neighbor makes all the difference in the world, because it's not one that can create the solution, but it's us together. Because there are institutions that has the capacity and has both, Moderna Museet has capacity doing research. They do. Anna has a PhD. And what I have learned from being now in the academy, the money that is in the field of research and the academy is totally different than we are, normally think of in the landscape of institution, as you mentioned. But you do have another kind of knowledge. You have a knowledge of the field, what's happening. You have the contact with the practitioners. So if the institutions that myself, Akademin Valand, we have great resources when it comes to founding research projects. So if we collaborate, the institutions that show photography, photographers, writers, and those that can bring the money. We don't have the money itself, but we can apply. So there are, possibilities. Aalto University in Helsinki is a great place for research. So, there is a landscape there, and if we look and, pull our resources together, that can happen.
Just a small comment, because we actually had a PhD approaching Fotografisk Center and wanted to do a PhD collaborating with us, but she was not allowed to do it from the people who had the funds because we were not a research institution. So there are some framework there which can bring some obstacles.
Well, I'm Anna Tellgren. I had to comment to you that actually in Denmark you have now the first professor in photographic studies with Mette Sandby.
Yeah, she's not a professor in photography, but she is a specialist in photography. That's true, but her title is not professor in photography, but just professor in arts.
No, I think it's photographic studies actually. As I understood. So, but anyway, so I mean that's a good start anyway. And as Niclas said, I think there should be more collaborations between different kinds of institutions, and the university is one, and the museum, and that would be very interesting, and that's something we have to do. And then I had one comment too with the photography library. Is still, I mean, the collection is still available. The art library and the photography library is now one library. It's called the art library, special library for art, photography, and design. So this fantastic collection of photo books is still available, and so well, yeah, that's just a comment.
Jenny Morelli.
Hi, I'm also curious about more resources to research. I would like to know, I would like you to be more precise when it comes to what kind of research, and also how do you think the photographic field can be strengthened by research, and how does the photographic field relate to the art field? Can you just tell us some more about your view on that?
Some photography have play an important part in the art field. We have now one of the most. There are rarely such a one-sided view on an exhibition that this is a really good exhibition, as Annika von Hauswolf, now up and running at Andrian Shevchenko. So that is an example how contemporary photography is, definitely is a part of the art scene. There are other photography practices that doesn't, blend or doesn't live its own life, and it's not a value judgment. It's the different circulations, and some more in between. So when it comes to what it can do, first the resources are, if you are a research institutions like the academies today are, like Valand and Aalto University, and it's a research based on the practice. So it's practitioners, so people who are active curators, writers, or photographers in the field of photography, mostly in the context of art. These people can be financed, do projects that are financed through research funds, which are, for example, Vetenskapsrådet. It's also that the institutions themselves have money doing things like that. We have now at the Academy 6 new doctoral candidates. They're founded for 4 years. Of course, that will make a difference. And I think if we collaborate, there's even more money you can apply for, both in the Nordic region, Nordic foundings, but also if we go outside and collaborate in the European Union, there are There are also extensive funds for money. And this is money that, institutions on the daily basis, these are amount of money that they never have in their budgets. So if we think what we want to do, we can apply. And it can be about history, it can be reflecting on the contemporary, it can be into certain kind of practices that one want to explore. Explore within the field of the art. So it's not just, theoretical research, it's research based on curatorial point of views, etc.
I have noticed that even the photographic field, just as the art field there is plenty of theory and theoretical research that relies on the same sources as certain philosophy. That the field of photography is developing the same way the art field does with theoretical research. Am I right, or can you say something about that?
To be a little bit more precise, I can give a very, because I share a room with Turon Martinsson, and he's a photographer and a PhD, and he works in the field of environmental studies. And as a practitioner, artist, and writer, he does collaborations with a wide range of people from different fields when it comes to preserving nature, and also philosophical reflections on the human, etc. And they result in books published by Steidl with, photo-historical reflections and a contemporary practice of rephotographing, which is a large thing in the more critical reflecting landscape photography. So that is one outcome, and how, photography, he's really classical traditional photographer, how photography can be part of a larger context. And then it's interesting, when we are proposing budgets, I'm overhearing his conversations, when he thinks, I need to do this, research trip and this conference, it will cost like 250,000. That is, felräkningsspace, kind of marginal, for those who does environmental studies or geopolitics, etc. at Harvard. This is no money. So when we step into other fields, the money we are used to operate within the culture field, get in perspective. So there are a lot to find there.
Jens Fries.
Just to correct the image of the lack of Danish research, I want to point to Mette Sandby, the recent appointed professor. She published or edited a book called Dansk Fotografihistorie 10 years ago, I think now. Also, Charlotte Præstegård Schwartz published Photography as Concept. Ingrid Fischer-Junge, my former director at Brands, is now doing research, has a three-year grant to do research on the Danish photography scene in the 70s and 80s. My point is, I think it's more a question of visibility, or the lack of visibility of these research material, because most PhD writers, they write for the academia, or they publish for their own drawer, and they can't get it further out than maybe to their colleagues. Maybe 10 people know about this PhD, and to publish a Danish photography history by Gyldendal certainly doesn't help either, because it's not translated into any foreign languages, so you might just as well give it to your grandmother. Nobody else is going to read it anyway. So visibility, I think, is the key word here. If we could create a forum for making all this research material visible, we've got a long step.
I just want to comment on this. I hope you don't think that I don't think nothing happening in Denmark. No. Yeah. And that's why research and the institution showing photography, the gain is the collaboration between, as you say, you can write the thesis, and if more than your opponent reads it, you can be happy. So it needs to have a platform to be mediated. And look, you have one more Danish, Louise Wolters at Hasselblad. She's now doing research on photography and surveillance, and that will in October create a large symposium and then an exhibition and a catalog published on an international publisher. So that is a way of getting the research out there, and then we need the collaboration, because research should not stay in that closed circle of the academy.
Okay, Tonje Birkeland.
Hi, I'm Tonja. I will try to be a bit short, but I would like to bring in like a voice of one of the artists here in the gallery, but also a voice from Norway, because it's very fascinating to be part of this discussion coming from a photo tradition in Norway. Because what's there? Like, what do we see in terms of history? We have Vibeke Tandberg working with the notion of herself and the double and that game and the tradition of Sofie Kall, and then we have Torbjørn Rødland, and we have the entire kind of really solid photography gang around Fotogalleri in Oslo, which is this super encouraging team of very, very different photographers. And one hardly talk about landscape or portrait or journalism, or it's more about working with photography as a medium within fine art, which I think is kind of falling a bit off here. And I think that's also something about what you miss, perhaps, or that you say like a lack of. I'm also very curious on this new Whitechapel book, because when I was living in New York as a Norwegian photographer, what was really visible there from the Nordic art scene was, of course, Alina Boterus, but also, on the other hand, like Eline Mugås, who works very differently and works with fanzine as her kind of photographic medium. And I'm also thinking about this with the research, because I also sometimes miss, like in the format of showing photography in institutions, like you say with Fotografiska, if you have other works, like performative works, it's quite normal to have like a page of text next to the work, next to the video, whatever, kind of bringing you into context. Whereas with photography, I work with photography and text myself, and the texts are very often left behind, and I kind of have to fight to get them included. And here we actually have a tiny piece, but it's like, because for me I think with all of us, there is so much we want to say with these works, but we also want to leave this door open to the viewer to not state it as political or not state it as landscape works. Because with my works, for instance, I think what really provokes people with standing in front of this landscape is perhaps not the visuals of a woman standing in front of a landscape, but it is about our history as, like our history in Scandinavia as colonialists. That's what makes it so provocative, but we don't really pinpoint it. But when I write my text, of course, I write about that aspect, about actually being able to provoke with beauty, or to provoke with even kitsch. And yeah, so I think I'm really curious on that new Whitechapel book, and also to see something that's not landscape. And yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a good point. First, I would like to say that I have tried to look into how the idea of Scandinavian photography has been framed institutionally and by curators and writers. And I am myself, if that hasn't come through, a bit critical towards this image. Therefore, I also ended with, and unfortunately I didn't have any picture because the book is not out yet, about the book about Scandinavian photography that has another take. And it's actually, and that should have been made clearer, it's made by these great people in the scene of Oslo. So it's the Melk Gallery in collaboration with Black Dog Publisher. And I think if I'm looking where something is happening that is actually, moving in another direction, take another turn, it's in these people in Oslo doing a lot. So this book, I think it's 33 or something artists working with photography that are presented. And actually I asked them, what do you do with the Helsinki school? They're not there. So this is a very strong statement from them. I won't say that we should neglect Helsinki school, but it's interesting that they thought that we don't want that in our presentation of contemporary Scandinavian photography.
Just a small comment. I think that can be completely natural from a more Norwegian Scandinavian perspective. It can be quite natural to actually leave out the Helsinki school from a Norwegian Scandinavian perspective, because like it actually took a while. Like I think I was in my master's studies before I heard anything about the Helsinki school. It's not like a big, but then it gets very interesting because it's left out, and you get to go into something else, and then to see this, like you say, some people are doing very well because they have their own voice, whereas others are kind of drowned within this concept. Yeah.
Two last comments, Christine Kern and then Christine Høyemos, which will be the last one.
I just want to go back to the magazine situation, which you started with, and I thought it was very interesting, and I just want to ask what do you think we should do now? Do you think is there the need for a new Nordic art magazine, or should we make some digital platform, whatever, or should we just leave it at books? I'm not familiar with if this book that is going to be published tomorrow has an overall text. I was invited to make an artist profile for it, but I'm not familiar with the total concept of the book. So I was just wondering, where do you think we should go from here?
I think that one should consider different kinds of platforms, and I think digital is probably necessary and will be a very good vehicle for also quicker response. And I think on Charlotte Cotton's her e-publishing kind of project, but nothing beats the paper product when it comes to, interestingly. I might say it might be conservative, but still. And you're looking into history where things have, made some kind of success. It has been in relation to publications that have been thinking intelligently about how to be part of a larger scheme and context. And I think this Nordic Now issue is a great thing. And I think we should, if there are different magazines, once a year we probably should do, or one should do one Nordic Now kind of theme. But the content of that should be much more, blending in to an international reflection on photography, and especially, and it's also that in this globalized art world, it's also actually we all have to speak from somewhere. So it's I think it makes sense also having this kind of Nordic profile, but not isolating it. The other thing, the key thing is distribution. If I was a politician and thinking of promoting culture, I should put in a lot of money helping people distribute magazines and books, because there is a lot of books done, but the difficulty is to get out there. That's also why I think the Malk publication is so good, because it's done in collaboration with an international publisher. That is also something that has to be done. Sometimes that need resources that you as the producer have to pay the publisher, or also pay the one who do the distribution. Funds should be, we should be able to get funds for that. And if we don't, we can collaborate and have more money to do that.
Yeah, just shortly, I'll try. My name is Christine Høyemos. I curated this show and worked with Christine. I just want to say that I think research, it's important to understand research in many ways. Research doesn't just have to be a PhD from the university working with art. Perhaps research can also be done by an artist, and it can be done in shorter ways. All these discussions and analysis and going into the artworks, getting in deeper, there can be many ways of research, and I think it's interesting to, because myself, I would like to do some research, but I don't want to do a PhD, and how can you do something in between, like smaller projects, and thinking about an exhibition as part of a research project into landscape or into photography, and also working as an artist is often also doing a lot of research in different ways, and I think that's important as well, that you don't have to read a full PhD to get a view into some kind of research on photography, maybe just shorter article stuff published online, or an exhibition or an art project. I think that's important to
I just will
stress as well.
briefly comment. It's very important, and that's in the line with my thought, because if we do research as a collaboration, you need to get the money, have to have someone who is a PhD, otherwise you can't apply. But when you then put together a team, it can be artists, curators, writers, practitioners. So that is the possibility. So, and that especially within the art academies, having a research project. So I'm totally with you there. The other thing is, and that's the last, there is a scene of photography. Photographers from the Scandinavian countries that are part, I won't say natural, but they are integrated part of the large photography as art, and that is through publications. I mean, there are books there that you find at Palais de Tokyo, or by young photographers from the Scandinavian countries. Often they live in Berlin, though. But so there is, the book scene is so important, and I think we could get more support there for the distributions.
Thank you so much, Niclas. Well said. And the next speakers are two, Morten Andenæs and Andreas Bennin. And Morten Andenæs is an artist and a chairman of NOFOFO, Norwegian Photographic Fund, in Oslo. And he will be in conversation with Andreas Bennin, Norwegian photo and video artist based in Sweden. Yeah. Right. Here we are.
Yes. Thank you. I'm just going to find the... Vi må ha maskinen til din maskin, må vi ikke det? For der ligger mine... Dine ligger der? Ja. Å nei, den ligger her. Ah, der, ok. Ja. Ja, det er fint.
Thank you for your trust. Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah.
Är ni färdiga? Ja, jag ska ta det. Okay, then we will start. So everyone take your seat and finish your private conversation. So that.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Morten Andenæs, and this is Andreas Bennin. Formally, I'm here from the Norwegian Photographic Fund. We are I'm not sure the exact translation, but a vederlagsfond, which means that any image, any photographic image that is used in, for example, a school textbook, will generate a small amount of money. That money together gets pooled into a fund, and we distribute that fund or that pool of money back to the arts community and back to artists working with photography. We support Fotogalleriet in Oslo. We're their main source of income, and we're also the main source of income for Forbundet Frie Fotografer. Aside from that, we also twice a year we give out grants for project support for individual artists, and I think every year we have about 3.5 million kroners. That's whereas a little over two go to FFF and Fotogalleriet, and the rest is pulled back to artists. this is, of course, I'm not sure if you have a similar thing either here in Stockholm or in Sweden or in Denmark or in Finland. I mean, I know that the Norwegian grant situation is quite specific and quite good compared to, I mean, like I have a 3-year working grant from the government, and there are quite a lot of those working grants. So there's a lot of money for artists in Norway. But I'm also, I mean, mainly I'm here as an artist, and I think that what Tonje was getting at, and one of the things that we've been noticing as well when we've been here, is that I mean, this is mainly a conference I know for curators and people working institutionally with photography, but from an artist's point of view, I think it's good to get an artist's point of view as well. I've been working for the last 10 years or so mainly in Oslo, working with, I have a gallery there, Galleri Ris. But I had my first solo exhibition at Fotogalleriet in 2007, and Andreas also has shown at Fotogalleriet in 2013. And Fotogalleriet is kind of the main platform for emerging young artists in Norway. Now we also luckily have Melk. I've worked with them since they started up in 2008. I was their first exhibitor there, and they've kind of become an alternative to Fotogalleriet, which is fantastic, because Fotogalleriet, one of the things that's happened in Norway is that we have a very polarized photo field. You're either extremely, I mean, either you barely make photographs at all and you're simply commenting on image culture, or you're very traditional and you're using, you know, you're like a black and white purist, and there's been no kind of in between. And for someone like me who was coming from education in the States, I felt, when I came back, I felt like there was no space for me really, because I was working in a different vein, which was more along the line of someone like Terence Simon or something, working with photography in sort of a very subjective documentary, staged. I mean, there's all these kind of things, all these kind of different fields pulling together. And in Norway, there was, you know, people weren't really doing that. Then Melk came along, luckily, and they've kind of opened the field up, and all of a sudden there's really a breadth of photography going on in Norway, and in Oslo in specific. But one of the things that the project that I've been working on the last 10 years now, with both photography and text, I've vaguely titled Regarding the Middle Class. And I think the project as a whole is a way of examining or teasing out the underlying narrative that structures our experience of seeing. What is it we see, and how do we see what we see? Why is it that we see the world in a specific way? And this has to do with this idea of the Scandinavian model, or growing up in this environment. And I think what I've been doing in this project is to turn towards a system that spawned me and my gaze, and more importantly, using this gaze or inherited worldview as a way of framing the world. Now, I think there's one of the things that I feel kind of lacking oftentimes in photographic discourse is we have this assumed idea of what photography is and what it can do. Now, photography is being used by everyone every single day, and I mean the amount of pictures that are on Instagram, for example, is insane. There's something like 60 billion images on Instagram, and everyone can basically use photography. Everyone uses it to communicate, but I don't think that most people know what they're doing when they're communicating with photography. So the question that I've been trying to figure out is, okay, we have this narrative in Norway. We have this narrative about what the social democratic project is, what it means to be a part of that. And we grow up in a system that even, it encourages us to be good citizens that even critique our own system. So we're encouraged to make art. We're encouraged to be critical of the system. How are we to start asking questions about that system? Because this, I think, is, if we're going to be doing this, we should be trying to ask questions about what's not right. I think most of us working in, I think especially at least I, and I think Andreas as well, is working from this notion that we live in one of the most well-to-do, well-put-together societies in the world, and yet there are things going on here that just don't ring true with the idea this system has outwards. We have this one vision of, like Norway, for example, likes to see itself as this beacon of peace. We're peace negotiators. We treated the Oslo Treaty, where we give lots of money to countries in need, etc., etc. But what's going on our home turf? And so the question is, how do we start to question this? One of the things that I've been working with this, but in perhaps a more personal way, trying to look at, okay, where is it I come from, both familiarly and in terms of the society at large. But Andreas Bennin, he's been working with a project for the last 5 or 6 years called A Nation Restored. You're going to see the pictures from his work behind us, but you're also going to see Verena Winkelmann's pictures titled Fathers. And this project is by a Norwegian photographer, Verena Winkelmann, who's been photographing fathers with their small children, trying to look at this, very specific Scandinavian, if it is specific, role of the father in relation to the infant. But what I wanted to do was to look at these pictures, and Andreas is going to talk about his own project, but I wanted to look at these pictures in tandem because there's this idea of the father in the social democratic, I think, model that the father is this benevolent figure. The authorities are this benevolent figure who, as I said, encourages us to kind of even rebel against him, all the while knowing that we're going to come back to him. Our rebellion is going to be, it's kind of inscribed into the system. So by looking at these pictures that are seemingly beautiful landscapes, I wanted to just start off by saying, because this project is very rooted in the idea of fatherhood or the founding fathers of Norway. So if you start just telling us a little bit about the project itself.
Yeah. Definitely, it has to do something about. I didn't think of it as some sort of like a father figure or how we relate to the government initially. I think I started by how I came into this project. The images you see are all taken from a large mountain in Norway, which is called the Dovre Mountain. And historically very, very important mountain in Norway. It comes through in all the myths of how Norway became to be a country. During the national romantic period in Norway, mid-1850s, and later on, it was used strongly, especially this mountain area, to define the national state. What is Norway to be after 400 years in a union with Denmark? And then being in one with Sweden, it felt urgent to define what's Norwegian. That is a discussion that has been going on in Norway for the last 3, 4, 5 years as well, defining what is Norwegian. And what we've talked about a lot, nature came very, very high up. Norwegian has a tendency to define themselves as not only a part of nature, but sort of like a victim of. Which makes it a little bit different than the national epos of Sweden and Denmark. But in this case, the project that existed outside of my project is that on the top of this mountain, 165 square meters of a previous shooting range was to be demolished.
Square kilometers.
Definitely square kilometers.
Huge mountain area.
Yes, it's a vast area by the foot of all these hills you see here that has been the most heavily bombed area in Norway. The Defense Estate Agency called it Back to Nature, which I thought was rather amusing. What they were doing is to remove all traces of the military activity that has taken place there and restoring it with nature. The idea was to construct nature as it was, reconstructing nature, but constructing a total new landscape. Because by moving all the traces, that all the landscape you see here is filled with shrapnels and debris from 100 years of weapons and ammunition testing. It has not only been a place for NATO forces to have exercised it, but it has also been a place where Norway has tested out their weapon that we, as we like to think of ourselves, as a beacon of peace, promoting peace all over the world. This is something very, incoherent about this idea, because Norway was per capita in 2011 the second largest weapon exporter in the world, which I had no idea about that before researching into it. But so my project it started off as a way of documenting the landscape, seeing if I, with photography, could be able to capture the moment of metamorphosis. When does this area goes from being a shooting range to a national park, which is the aim for this? By 2021, this will be declared as a national park. Ironically enough, since, all this history that has taken place there will hopefully then be erased, but there will be traces of it. History can't be reversed. And to me, that felt troublesome, because I find that in these, as you were talking about with the father figure, one thing that is, I think, uniting us in Scandinavia is that we have one of the highest beliefs and trust in our governments than anywhere else in the world. So, but of course, in this case, I felt that, what is the government doing there? Well, they're covering up all the traces of a military activity, where else the traces in the landscape could be a strong reminder to everyone about warfare and benefiting from the sale of arms.
And in that sense, there's something to be said for this idea that in order for, Norway, we were dirt poor before, the early 70s, late 60s, because, not on a completely different level than, so, when we come to Stockholm, we feel like the very provincial little brother, which is what we were. Our castle in Oslo is this, it's King Carl Gustav's vacation home, basically. And you can laugh, but it's true. And we were a nation of peasants, basically. And then we got the oil, and we started making a lot of money. And I think that, there's this, in Norway at least, there's this idea that, as with the weapons export, weapons trade, that what we're exporting, be it oil or weapons, is what's needed in order for us to have our immaculate welfare society. And within that, there's also the role of the artist. We are a part of that welfare society, the welfare model. The money that we're getting, from grants, is also money that's generated by oil, by weapons industry. And so there's a very sort of double-edged sword here that in order to critique the system, the question is, how do you critique this system? And this is where I find your work to be interesting, because it's not the typical, we were talking about activism yesterday, it's not a typical, activist. He's not up there, chaining himself to the ground saying, don't remove this. You're doing this in a very subtle, very kind of almost unnoticeable way, and yet, could you talk a bit about because you've been gaining access to this area for 5 years now.
Which I thought was going to be very difficult, because it's the army. I'm a pacifist, I haven't even been to the army. But getting access there was surprisingly easy. And all of these images have been shot by helicopter. And that's the army's helicopter. I was allowed to join them, and as I worked with them for several years, they took me the places that I wanted to go, which was a bit of a privilege. It also put me into a strange position where those that I wanted, not those that I wanted to criticize, but the project that I wanted to lift up, what are the motifs of this large-scale alteration of a landscape means for us as a nation? In a way, I was starting to feel more and more, not embarrassed, but also like a bad feeling that I was open the whole time, that I am investigating this. I will use art to to try to depict this landscape and the variety of effects from this alteration of the landscape. And it was a strange feeling in a way, but I have.
Did you ever feel compromised? I mean, did you feel like you were what's it called? That you had sort of a straitjacket that you could criticize but not really?
Initially I think that they were so happy to see all these beautiful images of landscapes. After a couple of years, they wanted to buy them and have them on the walls. After a couple of exhibitions, when they saw how the audience and the critics perceived this, that sort of like fell away. I mean, they didn't buy any of them.
Because this was actually, when this was shown at Fotogalleriet, it was the year leading up to the 200th anniversary of our constitution, 2014. So it was the year before that. There were a lot of things happening in Oslo at the time that were all kind of pointing towards the anniversary.
The whole idea, or the whole talk about what's it being Norwegian, which could be what's being Scandinavian, but in this case, it was about what's being Norwegian. That whole discussion was very, very present at that time. And I think that the reason why this has been called a nation restored is that I felt that there was an urge, since we all of a sudden had transcended from one of the poorest country in Europe to one of the richest, or maybe the richest, benefiting from oil, a pretty dirty business, and exporting arms. It felt like when trying to renew the image of what is us, what is being Norwegian, or Scandinavian, but what is it? What's the core of being Norwegian? We tendence to go back to this national romantic notion of not only the country and the way it looks, but ourselves as individuals. Norwegians tend in a way to lean towards the idea that we have more or less sprung out of the mountain itself, out of the rugged sea, and that is who we are, and that is a very comforting place to be. But the change from Norway as it was, when the forefathers of the Constitution wrote it in 1814, and up to now has altered a lot. We have participated in at least 3 definitely wars the last 15 years, are providing weapons to larger part of the world, and has become a wealthy, rich and modern nation.
And now we're even, with the weapons export, we're even supplying components, because they're trying to get away also from this idea of being a nation doing this, that we're supplying instead components that could be used in
and surveillance system as well. Yeah. The funny thing is that the way that this is done, the alteration of the landscape, is, of course, there are hundreds and thousands of guys going out in the whole landscape, picking up shrapnels and debris. After that, they are digging over the old roads. They're going through the roads and the large shooting fields, constructing new landscapes. Last year I was up there, and they had planted out 27,000 seedlings of small plants, taken seeds from in the landscape, grown up somewhere in the southern part of Norway, and then brought up there again, planted by some Serbian workers who constructed this huge area to look as nature. Most of the work up there is being done because there is a danger of explosions. So most of the work up there is performed by remote-controlled vehicles. That is, that there are these Norwegian guys trained in the army to do very professional drone technology, as we are exporting quite a lot of as well, sitting in these bunkers that are bulletproof and safe in any way at kilometers distance. And then you have these lone digging machines working and molding the landscape so it to look as nature. And to see these sort of like a modern military technology that we benefit very much from being used to make nature was, is still something that I find scaring and amusing.
Well, this is, I think, I feel like this gets to what how you're approaching this work, because as I said, you're not, this is not an overtly political stance you're taking. You're not, you're not writing on top of your pictures, stop the restoration of nature, or, you're making these very beautiful landscape pictures that are difficult to tear apart from. If you didn't have the caption, if you didn't know the story behind it, they would look like beautiful pictures of Norwegian nature. So I'm wondering about this, the way of approaching this subject matter. How do you look at that? Do you feel like is that the best way to, because this is one of the things that I'm thinking about, what happens when we see these pictures, or what happens when, call it the powers that be, see these pictures, is that they end up in a state where they don't really know what's going on. Like you said, like they don't know what it is you're actually trying to do. There comes this point where there's a kind of uncertainty in them. They don't understand, wait, is this critique, or is this, what are you actually doing? And I feel like that's a very productive moment that you're at there, because if you go out and you're an investigative journalist and you write about this, and you bring a photographer up there and they take pictures of before and after, and you write this scathing piece about, the beacon of peace has been doing this, and now they're trying to cover up all their trails. I feel like what's going to happen is the benevolent, call it the benevolent father, is going to be like, well, yes, this is what we're doing, but,
I think that in all my works, previous to this as well, and there's always been a strive for this. There is something with photography and photo-based medias that has this a priori trust to it. It is something real. We believe images more than we believe most other things. And then to search for that moment of you're really not quite sure what you're looking at. I've always been aiming for that, and I'm happy to see that is also a take on this project, and I think that also made it easier both for people to see this project and to experience more than this is anti-war, this is anti the government, because I don't think the world is that simple.
Do you think, have you thought about what, because I've thought about that, what would this project be like in the States? How would you go about doing this in another part of the world if you were to, if you had the same sort of conditions? Would it work? Because that's kind of what I'm kind of after, is a way of critiquing society is also kind of society specific, that you have to target kind of your, much like and someone in advertising has to know who they're targeting. I feel like, we have to, being from the country that we're from, we have to also know how to target. Because I feel like much of what's being made is very, it's easy, it's I don't know, there's something dangerous about this because it's so hard to grasp.
I think that the whole time throughout this project, that I've been working with text as well extensively, and has done a lot of talks and lectures around at universities and other places, which is something that it felt very good the moment that I decided that is one part of my practice on this project, and I wanted the images to be what they are. To separate that in a way, because giving the lectures, it's much more political, I think, and I stress much more all this about weapon exports. But I am happy when I see that the images has this sort of like an ambiguity or undefinability about them. Of course, with these works, I strive for, of course, it's easy, understandable, hearing me talk about it, that I was concerned about using this iconic or this very romantic way of depicting nature. So I went to the National Gallery and saw how all the old paintings were done by our masters in the Golden Age in 1880s. Saw how they depicted the landscape and used that very much to depict this military landscape as it is per definition right now, and of course, there is this thing when we talked about fathers and the government as sort of like a father figure that we have a strong belief and confidence in. There is. No, I lost the thread there.
Well.
You piqued me.
Well, you started off. I mean, because we were talking about that yesterday here. This idea of the romantic and the romantic landscape. I mean, when Andreas showed this work at Fotogalleria, he created one of the rooms there. He rebuilt the room, and basically made it into the.
Sort of like, I mean, it was based on the National Gallery in Oslo, but it looks like many of the others. I mean, with an overlight and these deep red orangey colors that was used in mid 1800s because that was seen as the best color to bring out the nature. So it was made like this miniature gallery. But of course, then hopefully, then when you know that this is something quite different, you are looking at a beautiful landscape, but then, in a way, as you said, being ambivalent or being ambiguous in a way with it is something to do with we are all. It's our duty. I think that it's our duty to be conscious about. I mean, we are all constructing reality. This is a way of the Norwegian state constructing a reality, saying that we are altering this landscape. It will no longer be a military landscape. After 2021, people, and soon after that, I mean, we forget easily, people will have forgotten what has happened in this landscape. The physical traces and evidences are no longer there. So the landscape you're walking in will be experienced as wild nature because it has been constructed as such. So
much like how actually a photograph, I mean, if you post 122 pictures of yourself on Instagram as the perfect housewife, you're going to be perceived as the perfect housewife. I mean, there's
absolutely
something to this. I mean, I feel like there's a reason you've used photography. Because that's, I kind of want to get at that why are we to use photography? Like, does it still have the power to kind of make us see the world again? Does it still, or is it, because at times I feel like I just feel like there's no hope left for photography. There's nothing, yes, we can, there's lots of good photography going on, but is any of it actually anything more than a great exercise? Is it really actually trying to use photography on its own terms to try to figure out what is it that photography does that nothing else can do?
I think that photography, more than any other art form, are able to, let's put it that way, construct a reality. Because the way we tend to see photography as this is what is real. I mean, let's forget about the whole photo manipulation discussion, but I mean, it's still basically, I find that when you look at a photography, this is real. It has reality connected to it, so definitely. I read this, or I heard this interesting guy on Swedish radio the other day who talked about how he had a miserable summer. He had to work all summer on a huge project, but 3 times during the whole summer, he had taken some photos while he was out having a caffè latte or even having a caipirinha or something, and he posted those images on the internet. And he was talking about this on the radio. How he was now starting to feel insecure. Was the summer really that shitty? Because he had, only these 3-4 images has really, it forces him to believe that, maybe it wasn't that bad. There is something. I believe in the power of images as not only depicting something real, something actual, but also constructing it. Social constructivism is based on how we how we construct the reality, and quite often also then how we want it to be.
It's a form of brain. I mean, it could be seen as a form of kind of soft brainwashing in a way also.
Definitely.
The social democratic model. I mean, I feel like it's a version of the original sin, that you're kind of born into this system of, you know, which has an effect on you. It's not like you're born pure.
No, and I mean we have this. We're talking about Scandinavian model. I mean the Scandinavian model, as it is in sort of like politics, where large number of countries in the world has looked to Scandinavia, has to do with this political agreement that, you know, the state, workers' union, and what are the other end? Those that employ people. No, those that employ people, the employers' organizations, have this shared responsibility for getting to agreements that secure our welfare. This also, I mean, this is a model we're proud of and it works well, but still, this model demands of us as citizens to obey a system, and also based on the belief that the other parts wants us good. In a way, so there is this thing about not being paranoid about the government. I don't think it has to do about that, because there was no one ever in this project from the army side that decided that now we will lure the people into believing that this is something that it's not. But no one had really thought about what's happening with our access to our immediate history. By altering this landscape, by altering a landscape, by defining it by words, you are also altering reality and the future.
But isn't that the kind of because that's the kind of bigger philosophical question here, is that what's actually the result of this? I mean, yeah, it's going to be pretty much untouched nature, but, you know, is that even kind of a possibility? Is it? I mean, you're because you're very. I mean, Andreas, another interest of yours is botany, and, you know, the life of the living organism. And, you know, is it going to be?
That of course the ironic part of it. Some of the larger military installations, and there are not that many of them, but they will be removed. But the landscape, as it looks now, would to all of you be as, wow, majestic Norwegian mountains, so beautiful, you know? And it will look exactly the same when they're done, except that it has costed pretty much 65 million euros, which is an immense project. It is the largest nature restoration project in the history of Norway.
And when you tried in your own little way to get one part of this field fredet, that they weren't allowed to touch it, yeah?
Yeah. That was, maybe I had a couple of more like typically activist take to it. And one of them was that they had this large square, 600 by 400 meters, where our previous success export article, cluster bombs, has been tested. This is, of course, it was crucial for them to remove exactly that spot, although it was beautiful the way it was situated. And I really wanted to make them preserve that and have it marked, you know, this we call it in Norwegian kringle, this culture mark, saying that, you know, because in this whole area there are 1,600, I don't know what this is called in English, but where we used to catch reindeers. You make a hole in the ground and you have sticks around. You know, we have over 1,600 of them in this landscape, and they are, of course, all preserved. If you touch a stone on one of them, I mean, you could theoretically, you get at least a fine, but you could also go to prison. But these newer traces of them, of our history, are to be demolished. So that was like a goal. I applied to the kommune and the fylke, the len, to have this preserved as a national landscape. Not very successull.
But do you think that's because of just, you know, it's just a you know, a huge amount of red tape to go through, or is it because, I mean, that's kind of I feel like if we're gonna close in on something, I feel like is this really is this like a big stain on the Norwegian
the military landscape?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, given that they're doing this, is it what weighs more to create a new sense of, or a continued sense of belief in ourselves as this nation of majestic mountains and you know,
And
good,
and
peaceful
by
people,
slow nature, yeah.
or is it, you know, Jesus, we have to just get it away. We
Yeah.
don't.
There is a huge bureaucracy, of course, but I don't think there is not like one group of people sitting and deciding these things in that way. I think that it has to do with prestige. There is something called INON certification of a landscape that's valid throughout the world, which is pieces of land where there has been no human interactions. It has limits, so that an old gravel road or a 400-year-old farmhouse is not a part of that, but a new concrete road is, fucks that up. So it has been really important because it's a prestige project. We're talking about urskog. I don't know what that's called in English either. I mean, we have this discussion going on in Sweden that we have 0.06% of the Swedish forest that are untouched forest, and even that is hard, pretty debatable. But it has a lot of prestige about having as much untouched land as possible, since that has been, become such a valuable asset. So I think that is now maybe, one of the main reasons. The locals in this area, they said, "No, please let us just keep the roads. We want them. We herd our sheeps in there. So can we please keep them?" And that was taken high up in the court system before the army could, run them over and say, "Nope, everything has to go."
See Gunilla looking at us. Should we?
No, that's good.
No, yeah. Should we just quit it there and see if there's any questions about?
Thank you so much, Morten and Andreas. Really interesting and great to see the slideshow go. Since we're a little bit behind in schedule, we will take like 1 or 2 short questions now, and then we will be able to come back to these topics of national identity in the concluding discussion, so we don't mess up our afternoon. So, Ditte and Johan.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ditte, and thank you for showing your project. It's really interesting. I was just there myself this summer on a holiday, and I can mention that my dad-in-law was trained there when he was in the military, so fun little comment, interesting to think of. Well, it's just more as a comment to your thing. I also think that one of the reasons why they're doing this project is probably because one of the most famous viewpoints in Norway, Snøhetta, is when you visit that architectural building, you kind of look directly down to a part of this area.
Yeah, you saw that square then.
Yeah,
from that,
yeah, and they started to do that. But I mean, I guess also, as I see it, trying to get into this project, I guess it all just started up as they wanted to clear it up, right? I mean, that is dangerous, and it's pollution in a way, and it's just lying there, and you can't really, I mean, it's dangerous to take a hike there. People can do it anyways if they dare, but still. And then, of course, where to stop, and the interesting part in that, what kind of architectural setup are they bringing back? I mean, where are they getting the plans for, as you said, or from, as you said, or talked about as well. But also I thought that this summer there was like a lot of discussion going on in the Norwegian press or news about invasion types of flowers in nature, and how they along the roads were trying to suddenly kill or take away different types of flowers, which today is very normal, and I don't think any of us think of them as not belonging to there. But so I think there is like a lot of things going on with like trying to again control nature or what was actually there. I also know that a lot of places where in the high north of Norway that they are taking away what is it called, the pine trees plantations, because they were not originally there in the landscape, and now they want to take it back to how it more originally looked like. So, but of course, yeah, like here you have the military element, which is, yes, Norway. I mean, when I was growing up, there also something we were talking about in the car drive was driving along the railway. I mean, I know that wasn't the Norwegian people forcing the Russian slaves to build the railway, but is it like 100 or 1,000 who died per meter? I mean, it's quite amazing to think of, or terrifying. And it's not something you think of when you are taking the train. I mean, every day, right, that I can be here because so many people died.
If I can just say briefly a couple of things to what you said. I mean, one thing is altering nature with the goal to make it be natural or genuine has, of course, provided this project with a huge amount of problems. I mean, when you are, evening out a place, smoothing out the soil so that this should, look local. The tractor brought in some seeds from where it came from. So now all of a sudden you have this very surprising green road in the middle of the mountain, which they really don't know what to do about. I mean, that's one of the things. And when you said the Viewpoint Snøhetta, which is a Snøhetta Norwegian architect design bureau that has made a beautiful pavilion where you really go up there and you look into this majestic landscape and it's it's stunning.
And you look at the mountain Snøhetta.
Then you look at the Snøhetta, national mountain, which is...
This is about Snøhetta.
This is Snøhetta, looking at Snøhetta. It's very meta. But at that spot, of course, what they've done there is that you have 1.6 kilometers to go up there, and they have made these plaquettes, in metal put into the ground, where you tell the history of Dovre, which is again this a bit to me rather nauseating image, because we are not just reindeers and farmers and kind caretakers of nature. In that area, they haven't said anything about the military activity, and they haven't seen anything about the fact that right under the path you were walking, there is a mine that is 2.6 kilometers deep that are polluting the river, just down. So we have this way of what we pick out and what we present the whole time, which is interesting to see, what makes us do as we do.
Okay, Johan Bergström.
Johan Bergström heter jag, svensk konstnär, Swedish artist, sorry. I really like your work, and I have a question about political work, because it really resembles work that I did 6 or 7 years ago about Swedish state-owned power company Vattenfall, considered green, and doing coal mining in the eastern part of Germany and Poland. But I had, and I also did it in a very subtle way, but I had so much doubts doing this project that I haven't really shown it in an exhibition and so on. And I believe there is a problem with political art, that it needs a mediated scandal to be reached out to more than the small part of the artistic scene. And the other problem is that when it becomes a scandal, the media tends to not discuss the problem that the artist wants to talk about, but more about how could it be so rude to waste our resources or funds to do this. Like the Swedish examples I'm thinking about is Lars Vilks, Anna Odell, and Makode Linde. That has been really mediated, but more kind of towards them, how can you do this?
Sort of how can you misuse the means you have been given by the state?
Yeah, or the cost that these projects will
put on society, like Anna Odell's thing. I mean, that really resulted in huge expenses for not huge, but expenses for the police. I would say,
So the question is, do you believe that there is possible to do political art, or do you feel like your work has changed something in Norway?
I definitely do that. I mean, there are so many ways to do. Okay, let's call it political art then. But I mean, I think that all art should, in a way, be political. I mean, political in the real, sense of the word is something that bears meaning. Meningsbærende. So I believe that all art should be political. But of course, there are ways to go about it. If you want to, have like a huge protest, make a projection of something on the wall of Vattenfall's main office, then of course you would encounter different reactions that would probably go both ways. But to me, it has been important with this to say that I don't know what is right to do about this, but I'm curious about what was it that happened that no one asked themselves the questions: are there any moral implications about altering a huge landscape and removing all traces of something that is a part of our common history? I don't have the answers to it, and in a way I would feel presumptuous to say that I have. Some projects could be that way, that you have something very urgent, you're very determined that, this is the answer. But I think that there are many ways to go about it, and using social media as well. There are many ways of a kind of like a silent revolution. This project has...
Can I just
sure.
jump in? Because I think isn't part of the... politics happens at a very sort of base level in general. It doesn't happen in the newspapers. It happens, through negotiations in closed rooms, at a very sort of pragmatic level. That I think that if you're going to change things, it's not necessarily about, getting it out in the newspapers, because it's going to be skewed to one side and it's sensationalist and all that. But, it's like the financial minister of Norway, for example. She'll come into the Post seeing that, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. But then all her advisors, when she's there, they're going to say, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that, because it's not feasible. It doesn't work in reality. You can go on a voting platform with that idea in mind, but that's not what's going to work. And I think that in this sense, this project is just, little seeds here and there that, involve people in a very sort of pragmatic way, asking questions rather than, seeing it as like a long-term project rather than, I'm going to stop this because,
asking questions and inspired to a conscious about making up your own, thoughts and ideas and be able to, stick to that. But we are all constructing things the whole time, and we all have, 85 different opinions about this very moment. So there is. I think I have sort of like a humbleness also when it comes to presenting work, because, the meaning it has for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people feels, really good. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So politics can be those small things that happens every day, actually.
Definitely, all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. And now we will break for lunch.